We are here with our webinar series of Keep Calm and AI On that we started back in February. With me is Gretchen Kiefner, Regional Vice President of Bullhorn. We also have a special guest, Blythe Kaspersak. Blythe, how should I introduce you? You're just so many different things to us. You're on our advisory board, but you're here with, I think, real life experience on chatbots today.
Yeah, I've been developing a workforce development company called Use and Connect that uses chatbot to reach our what we call our neighborhoods of focus here in Grand Rapids, which are the folks that are needing the most help in terms of getting into the workforce.
Wonderful. So what I'd like to do is kind of take us back to pre-COVID, which I think is an important point of view when Gretchen and I first started the series. So let me give you a little bit of context about that, because I think it's important, particularly in light of Blythe joining us today. So when we first started these conversations, it was really out of our commitment. When we talk about keep calm and AI on, that was the theme. And what we know is that there is a lot of hype, a lot of misunderstanding, and most importantly, a lot of fear around AI, automation, what we're calling the digitization of our workforce. And fear for the good reason that people, one, are afraid of change, and there's also all kinds of hype about, and you can hear it, robots will be taking over. They'll be taking over my job, they'll be taking over my ability to make decisions. And some of that is kind of true, like everything, but mostly not true. And so what Gretchen and I were attempting to do with this series was to debunk some of those myths and to really empower people with the facts about what is possible with automation. And our key commitment to you all is that it will make us more human, not less. So we started that, and I think got really great feedback about what we were talking about. But back in February, people were saying, you know, maybe someday this is going to impact me. I think it's really interesting you guys are talking about it, but they weren't necessarily where Gretchen and I were in saying, no, the future is here today. Fast forward to where we are now, of course, we had the global pandemic, which hit right around the time that we launched this. And suddenly the business case for what we were describing became apparent overnight. And what a lot of the experts, Bullhorn, McKinsey, Gartner, ourselves at GrowthPlay were predicting came true, not in a 5-year horizon, but in a 6-month period. And part of why Blythe has joined us today as a special guest is that she, in her community in Southwest Michigan, is responding to that need that has happened because of the pandemic. So Gretchen, I'm now going to turn it to you. That's kind of the context. You have some wonderful news in terms of COVID and what has made, what the information that you found in terms of the impact with your study from Bullhorn about how it's impacted people. And I would really like people to, again, ground ourselves in the fact and hear the opportunities. So why don't I just turn it to you and you can give us the most recent COVID study from your organization.
Great. No, thank you, Tracy. That sounds good. And I think that sets the stage perfectly. And like you said, Bullhorn just released a study on the impact of COVID-19. We sampled and surveyed over 800 different staffing firms of varying scope and size. And in addition to that, I've had multiple conversations with CIOs of the largest staffing firm to really understand how this is impacting them, how they're adjusting. To your point, people were thinking, yeah, I probably need to do this, but maybe that's at a later point in time. All of a sudden, everyone had to accelerate rapidly. And I think for software organizations and many different technology organizations, the rate at which we're seeing users increase their adoption of tools has, increased. It has been impacted dramatically. And to the point where organizations are seeing increases in productivity so big that a lot of them are making decisions not to come back to the office, to even sell off real estate and be a lot more cost effective with their budgeting and tools. So that's definitely a piece of it. I mean, the other piece of it is that almost half of all organizations have had to do some type of layoff or furlough, and everybody is having to do more with less. So they have to use the tools at their disposal to do that. Across the board, we're seeing big dips in areas like hospitality and travel, healthcare and retail areas. We have a lot of customers who service, Amazon. Those are stable and in some cases even increasing. So it's a bit all over the board, but what was interesting in our report is that there's a very optimistic outlook. And so over half of employers and staffing firms are saying, we think that the economy is going to move in the right direction quickly, definitely by the end of the year. And about 23% say that they think that's going to happen in the next 3 months. So pretty short term, even talking about the end of the year as we look at, moving into the second half of the year here. So I think that is really hopeful. Blythe, what are you seeing in your area? What is the outlook overall?
And so we're a second tier market here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I would say in West Michigan and Southwest Michigan, what we're seeing is the beginning of a recovery. So Michigan had a very intense beginning of the pandemic in our Detroit market. And so the whole state really shut down, and our governor was very conservative and data oriented in her approach to the epidemic. And as a result, we saw it was really a sharp cliff for companies. But what I would say more recently, and I'm talking to CEOs and folks that are in the HR side of things, there definitely is a lot more optimism and employment. The challenge is companies really, what I haven't yet seen is, are those permanent roles, or are they hedging bets with more contingent staffing options? And that's going to be the thing that'll be really interesting to see play out over the summer as we have a better sense of what the fall looks like. Is it, for the employment side of this, if you're out there trying to look for a job, is it a long-term commitment or a short-term commitment? The good news is there's more opportunity. It's just, that ability to be able to have some confidence around what the longer-term view looks like. So very similar to what you're sharing, Gretchen. That's maybe the nuance I would add.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And I think the other thing that we've seen a really big shift in is employers and staffing firms focus on the candidate experience. And there is, in many cases, a surplus of candidates. In some cases, employers are having a hard time finding candidates to take their jobs because of the benefits that they're seeing from the government at this point. The rates just aren't matching what they need in order to make a decision to have a commute again, to have their family make different decisions. So really different, but the fact is there is a surplus of seekers on the market right now. And there is an opportunity for employers and for staffing firms to capture hearts and minds right now and create relationships that can last for a really long time. But how do you do that? How do you scale when everyone is doing more with less people resources, more people to engage with? You can't talk to everybody who applies. And by the way, that's one of job seekers, this is not new. This has been, around forever. One of job seekers' biggest complaints, and searching for a job is one of the most stressful things someone can go through in their life. One of their biggest complaints is that when they apply for a job, the application goes into a black hole, right? And they don't hear from an organization at all. So how do you deal with that? And, I think that's one of the reasons that Tracy and I wanted to talk specifically about chatbots today, because that is one of the primary ways that chatbots can help. It's to get to the conversations that can create meaningful, lasting relationships at scale.
So Blythe, I think, a couple of things. So first of all, I would agree that, and we're hearing this, that searching for work is definitely the most stressful thing that most people encounter. And then you add this layer of the pandemic on top of it, and I think people are very worried that, that stress is real. And so in our first webinar that we did, we found that there's a lot of time that recruiters spend on manual process and things that don't really add to that, making the experience more human or the touch points of the candidate experience. And I think, since we are all in the industry and we've been on both sides of this, both consulting and delivering to these people, but also being job seekers ourselves, we understand the tension. We understand that it's not that there's a recruiter someplace purposely ignoring you, which is how I think it can feel to the candidate. And so I think that's part of what we wanted to debunk here, is kind of take a peek behind the curtain, talk about chatbots and how they're impacting that, one, the workflow for recruiters, but also for just, with some of the things that Blythe has experienced using chatbots to draw people in and give them a better experience. So Gretchen, did you want to show that slide, or do we want to just speak to we don't have to necessarily, but do you want to just speak, or you tell me, in terms of like the time that's lost on some of these activities?
Yeah, no, I'll share this picture really quick. Because I think it's a really impactful picture of where recruiters are spending their time. Yep. So yes, there's this piece about candidate experience and what automation and AI can do in general. There are specifically chatbots. And then there is the recruiter experience and where they're spending their time. And so this is showing that recruiters are spending over 40%, so nearly half of their time, on activities that don't add value, on things like receiving and routing job orders, entering details into the ATS. They're doing, like I said last time, they're doing the swivel chair thing, taking information from here, putting it in here, manually moving VMS job orders around, and probably not doing it in time, so those orders aren't getting filled anyway. And there's a lot of time and cost and energy and resource that is being wasted here. I mean, over on the right, that source and screen piece, asking job order clarifying questions, helping candidates really understand what is a fit for them and why a relationship should grow with your firm or company over time. That's where recruiters want to be spending the time. That has direct impact to the top and the bottom line as well.
Right. So now, Blythe, I just thought this slide would be great to set the context, and then maybe we could hear your point of view. So if you could talk a little bit about, because I understand this is kind of a new endeavor for you, part of your commitment to your community in Southwest Michigan, to address this, economic, the unemployment, right, in your community, which went from full employment to not overnight, literally, like many places. And you and your community have some pretty interesting perspectives, specifically using chatbots, which I think addresses how you and some other recruiters may be spending time, but also the candidate. So why don't you just kind of give us some context about how you've taken some of these concepts and put up the user experience?
Yeah, so one thing I would say to start is we started with a premise that so maybe Using Connect's purpose is to reach our neighborhoods of focus where we estimate right now, because the data is unconclusive, but something like half of that population is unemployed at this point. So when we were at full employment, so less than 3% unemployment in our market, we estimated that they were close to 20%. And now with our average, right, somewhere between 15 and 20%, we believe those neighborhoods are closer to 50% unemployed. And as we really started to understand the persona and their day-to-day life and some of the barriers they were encountering when they were trying to get work, one of the key ones is access to the internet and a computer. And so if nationally, a little bit over 70% of people have a computer and something around 80% of folks have a smartphone with a data plan, you're missing a portion of the population. And guess where those folks live? They live in these areas where there's a lot of challenges socioeconomically and a very long history around why that is. And so what we started to realize, if we wanted to help these folks with a technology solution, we would have to be using text. And so that really translated to 97% of Americans have a cell phone and they can call and receive a text message with it. And so when you basically say, if you are just relying on a form on your website or a typical ATS solution that's website oriented, you're missing 20% of the workforce. So based on that, it really shaped our thinking in terms of how do we build an intake process to help understand what these folks want to accomplish and help them either get resources or access to employment opportunities. So I'm just starting with the context around why a chatbot is so powerful, is that you have the ability to reach people that with a website you cannot. So I am gonna share my screen. Let's see if I can get to the right here. Can you guys see me okay?
Yeah.
All right, so this is the Using Connect website, and this is Consuela. So I'm gonna let her introduce herself for those Spanish speakers who are attending.
Connect. Mi nombre es Consuela y soy asistente de inteligencia artificial aquí para ayudarlo a avanzar en su carrera y vida. Utilizamos un enfoque de orientación profesional en persona, lo que significa que tratamos de comprender sus habilidades aprendiendo sobre sus experiencias de vida.
So I'll pause there because probably we can't translate that quickly, even if you did take some Spanish in high school. But essentially what we're trying to do here is introduce her as our avatar to help our Spanish speakers get used to the Use and Connect platform. We also have an English speaker named Connie. And essentially what we're trying to understand is, are you looking for a job? Are you looking for a gig? Are you trying to start a business? Or are you looking to volunteer? And based on that, we start an intake process and ask some questions to build a profile, all with text. So if I go quickly to that, so you can get a sense of what that looks like, you can imagine what this would look like. On the web experience, it looks like this, but on someone's phone, you can kind of imagine it a bit more as we go into a typical chatbot structure. This is, Consuela would be reaching out to them, or they would be texting to a phone, text job to this phone number type of thing. And then Consuela would introduce herself and ask a series of intake questions so she can really find out more about them and help figure out what resources, employment opportunities, or other things that we could present. It looks like Consuela's taken a minute. She's very busy, but as this fills in, you can imagine what this would look like if someone basically either texted to a phone number or saw a QR code in their church or in their community center, back when we could run around and be in person again. Or potentially we do outreach campaigns where we've got a set of phone numbers of folks that are part of a community, and we co-market with that organization and invite them to join the Use and Connect process. Our intent really is to work with inclusive employers who are trying to help these same people and connect the dots between openings that they have and folks that are ready to work. So I don't know why she's not responding right now, but
it's connectivity. See, even we who have internet, okay, have connectivity issues. If we were on our smartphones, we could be showing you Consuela right now. Okay.
I know, totally. It is funny how slow it is on, to your point, Trace, on my computer versus, I'll flip over to Connie. Maybe she'll be a little faster. But yeah, I think what I've learned as we've started to introduce this is there's so many organizations that tell me, so for example, social service organizations like the United Way or other organizations that know that they can't get in touch with people because of this issue around communication. And then you end up with phone tag, right? Where call between this time to this time and ask for this person. And that, whether you're talking about a recruiter or a social service organization, it's the same kind of coordination manual issue that both of these groups are experiencing. And often they're trying to help the same folks, right? Whether it's addressing, a homeless issue or a transportation issue or something like that. And on the employment side, the recruiter's trying to get an interviewer scheduled and gather key information and that kind of thing. So this is just one application of a chatbot. I think we're just about to launch, so I don't have any data yet to share about what adoption looked like and what feedback from users, but we're excited about the potential of, again, reaching that 20% of the population that just doesn't have a computer and internet at home to be able to fill out those online applications.
Right. That's awesome. That's really exciting. And I think you just mentioned something that really applies to everyone too, especially people who have a job now or who are maybe working a couple of jobs. They're searching on and applying on the weekend or late at night when people typically aren't available. So that's one of the best things, first of all, on your smartphone. So access is a piece of it, but the 24/7 piece of it, the ability for that chatbot to ask or answer simple questions, any time of day that the candidate needs and, the recruiter can't be online is hugely beneficial.
You know, to that point, one of the other things that I didn't even realize, but when I was talking and configuring this chatbot, they also mentioned is people can, they don't need a private room. So let's just say they're in a situation where there's a lot of noise around them, like they have children at home, or they're, and so they don't feel comfortable taking a screening phone call, or they're in an employment situation where they're on a break.
Right.
And they can answer a chatbot at that time. So back to your point, Gretchen, it's much more convenient and it allows people to do it on their terms.
Right, right. And frankly, just our consumer behavior is like that, right? And it's continually reinforced. And I read a stat, I'm probably going to mess this up, but the other day, like an additional 20% of the population bought things online for the first time since the start of COVID.
Really?
And they say they're going to continue to do that. So now we've got this whole group of people who, you know, were kind of laggards in adopting online, not just shopping behavior, but other things that is going to, you know, continue on and on. So the more that our preferences continue to build like that, the more our expectations for everything that we do and everything that we interact with, including employers and jobs, you know, for that to be consistent. And so I have a question for both of you, Tracy and Blythe. Why do you think then that only 11% of companies, and most of them are really large companies, have deployed some type of chatbot technology in their process specific to recruiting?
I have to tell you, it's funny. I mean, I think back to when you and I first started. So first of all, I've been interested. That's how you and I even got started on this series. You and I have been talking about how AI and digitization, whatever you want to say it, automation, all these different tools can set you free, make you more human. Look at the use-in example here, give you so much more possibility to do things, reach so many more, you know, so much of the population that you're trying to. Yet people are so resistant, and I think people still are resistant. I think that there's some aspect of a fear, and there's a lot of studies by Oxford University on this, around robots are smarter than you are. There's some way that if you're typing something into your smartphone, even to Blythe's example, even though I'm on my break, maybe my supervisor is still going to see it. Like there's definitely, I think, some rightful concerns about privacy, rightful concerns about hidden bias that could manifest itself into bad hiring practices. I think some of that's real, but I also think that it makes for a good story and it gets blown up far out of proportion. But either way, I think it stops people from taking action. And I think the other thing that we saw pre-COVID is that it seemed like a luxury, right? It seemed like someday I'm going to get to it. That's what people would say to me. And then all of a sudden that someday was today in March. And then I think the business case shifted. I don't know, Blythe, what would you say?
Yeah, I think the other thing I think about is I did a webinar a couple of months back with a woman who's led talent acquisition at very large organizations. And she and I went through the Talent Board's Candy Awards or Customer Experience Awards and what were the parameters in them. And one of the things that really struck out to me as she exposed me to that award and that process was just to your point, Gretchen, how important it is that people are really impatient and want immediate gratification. And when they have to wait to get an answer, they reduce their interest and they kind of move on to the next thing. And for employers to really keep people in a talent pipeline, they need that. But yet, the other thing that we brought up as a real barrier in terms of why hadn't people implemented some of this was that recruiting organizations, especially in larger organizations or in staffing companies where there's some scale, have so many different technologies that they're trying to implement. They have they have a core record keeping system, and then they've got a video interviewing tool, and they've got a referral system, and they've got, it's a web of technology. On average, it's something like 17 different technologies. And so if you're a talent acquisition leader out there or running a staffing organization, you probably have to have a dedicated person just on recruiting technology. And if your background checking vendor needs to be swapped, that's going to go in front of your chatbot. And so I think there's just this reality of bandwidth around hooking all this stuff up together. And I really love your phrase, the swivel chair, Gretchen, because you can imagine with 17 systems, and some of them have API where they talk to each other, some of them don't. And then you've got this issue of data management with all these systems. And of course, it works great until it doesn't. And then somebody gets stuck and something doesn't work, and you're problem solving that. And so I think that's a real reality, is that organizations maybe see the value, but have a hard time executing because of just the complexity. And ironically, chatbots, the context part of it is a little bit hard, but the technology itself is really straightforward. But there's just, it's in an environment that's already, complicated.
Yes, that is so true. I think that's a really great point. And what you just said is right. The technology itself is not that complex to implement, but in order for it to be really powerful, organizations should really take the time first to map out the entire candidate and client experience, and then understand where the chatbots can make the most impact, and very intentionally insert the technology into those points in the process. And that does take time, and these organizations do have lots of initiatives going on, but also lots of pieces of technology. I know for many of my customers and working in the staffing industry, a lot of them are still just working to get to one system of record, regardless of all the plugins that sit on top of that. So it generally is somebody managing that. But I think there are, bites and pieces that you can do, little steps you can take to see the value. And because the technology is easy to implement, I know that it's one of the easiest things to run like A/B testing with. And there are a number of organizations out there that will run pilot programs with companies to really understand if the business case is there. So I encourage organizations always to take a look at that. I also wanted to address the fear piece, because I do think that is, and the perception piece, that is still one of the driving factors of why there's not more adoption. And there was a great study done by TLNT and Maya AI, which is a great friend and partner to Bullhorn. And they found that 31% of respondents in a study that they did said they're afraid of what would happen to the candidate experience, that inserting a chatbot would actually be responded to in a negative way because it's not person to person, which is funny because if you look at those 11% of organizations that do deploy chatbots, they have no negative, like literally no negative response, recorded in their surveys. It's all, I either like it or I love it because of the ease of use and access and instant, response that those chatbots give. So I think that's really interesting. And the other piece is awareness. And unfortunately, like the original chatbot technology was pretty bad. And I think a lot of organizations tried it when it first came out and it didn't work, and did provide a bad experience. So I think there's a bit of a bad taste in some mouths, and that perception has continued to, live on and get louder, to Tracy's point. So
one thing I was going to say is I was just looking in the Q&A, and it looks like we have a question from Chuck.
I was just going to say it too, from Chuck. Okay. Yeah.
And
he wants to know if it's going to work on every candidate, right? All levels of job seekers. So, yep.
So I don't have any data on that. What I think is interesting, though, is the point that Gretchen made about time of day and when people, right? So I think about the reality is for people who are working and probably spent some time over these last few months homeschooling if they had kids and all of the different things, it's the ability to do it on their own time. That's the real value. And so it's hard for me to imagine a group of job seekers that wouldn't be helpful to. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I think something like texting may be more for lower level or hourly workers, but reality is it's not. I think it really is for everyone. And I prepared a short case study to share on the call today too, again, from our friends at Maya, talking about how they were able to fill a very high volume of ICU nurse jobs via chatbot and mobile technology. And so this is a healthcare staffing agency. They got a contract to fill 100 positions for these nurses, and they were trying to scale like 100 open positions for these ICU nurses, which is a position we know a huge skills gap exists. And they couldn't scale and reach everybody effectively. And when they were reaching out, it ended up being this phone tag thing and they weren't connecting. So they deployed Maya and intentionally ran this campaign. I think they did, it was 1 to 3 campaigns a week, targeting 300 to 500 different candidates over a period of time. And they ended up achieving a 92% interview schedule rate, and they were able to fill all 100 positions. So I think that's really a powerful story about how it can work even in an area where you think it might not.
I think that's super interesting to think about it, like recruiting. And a lot of recruiters already know this, but they're really sales and marketing people, right? They're just selling an opportunity to potential job seekers. And to think of it like a campaign where you're reaching in and touching someone on their phone in a text message. There's some stat I read that email response rates or conversion click-through rates are something like under 10%, like 5 to 7, versus a text is over 40%. So the ability for you to reach someone and get an answer more quickly is a much higher probability if you're using texting as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the time to interview value is a big piece too. If you are even over text, if you're using a chatbot, that chatbot can not only figure out what position you might be good for, or if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity or this opportunity, but then it can go ahead and schedule an interview with the right recruiter based on how, the candidate has answered. And I know Maya has tracked this across their entire customer base, and their customers typically see a 92% decrease in the time to interview. And if you really think about the candidate experience, like you're always waiting around, like, am I going to get an interview? And then the time to interview.
Right.
If you get to interview quickly, and then you've got this steady stream of interview conversations instead of all this busy work in the 42% bucket. That's huge meaning for companies and for candidates.
All right. There's a couple points that I would make. So the language issue, I think we need to address that. Right? Because I know that that's what some people have talked to me about. And to your point, Gretchen, early adopters of the chat found that it was clunky and, in terms of the translation, and it was complicated. But Blythe, you have done more research on this more recently. And I know for ourselves with the Growth Play Chally platform, we translate into over 20 languages ourselves. So I'm familiar with the need for this, but why don't you speak to, it's not just Spanish. You could do many different, you could have, what would a Polish version of Connie be? I don't know.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Language is tricky because I think the tools have the ability to be, like, I think we're using Zor. And Zor is able to manage, I think, 103 languages. The challenge is you have to figure out the questions that are in your flow. So if you imagine like how you program a chatbot is you have a flow chart with these questions, and then based on this answer, you have this question and then this question, kind of like, designing a conversation, so to speak. And you have to do that in the different languages. So let's just say we set up Connie, we set up Consuela, let's set up, maybe we set up Kanika and she speaks Hindu. And so then we've got to figure out how to translate our flow chart into that language. The chatbot can, manage the topography of the different languages and the translation pretty easily in terms of the responses, but you still have to do the work to, figure out like when I showed it to my, the Spanish speaking person I was working with, she's like, it sounds like you just did Google Translate and all these questions. Like, we need to make this actually sound like a Spanish speaker, which sometimes is reordering the words and using a different phrase that makes more sense. And so that's the part that there may be some time and effort to do that component.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think even with one language, it takes time, right? Like the whole benefit of AI is that these robots learn over time. They learn by the actions you take with these candidates or the questions that you program in, the path you put them on, to eventually be able to predict intent. And I think that's when they can be super powerful. But I can't imagine doing it in multiple languages. That is a lot of upfront work, but very big impact if you get it right. Yeah.
Well, speaking of the impact, I mean, what I think is we come up here, we've been talking about this. I know we're all passionate about it. We see all the possibilities. Certainly these statistics that you both share, particularly the Maya stats, Gretchen, are overwhelmingly impressive. And you would think everybody would be running to get this done today, right? I mean, 92% faster, speed to candidate, I'm going to be interviewing people. I want to just do that, just
yeah.
So what do we think, if we're going to give advice to folks, regardless of the size of your organization, about getting this going and implementation? Let's talk about some of the hurdles you might encounter. We just talked about a few of them, understanding the conversational flow and how challenging that can be up front. But what else? What else do people have to think about as they think about implementing something like this? Because again, our commitment is to enhance the candidate experience, get people jobs faster, have them feel better about themselves through the process. So Gretchen, why don't we start with you? What do you think, advice you would, tips you'd share?
Yeah, what we haven't talked about yet is how this can help organizations increase the diversity of who they're hiring. And reality is there's been a lot of debate around whether or not AI and chatbots in particular help or hurt when it comes to unconscious bias. And I think this is a caution to organizations. It can be really powerful and helpful if done the right way. If you take the time up front to intentionally remove demographic consideration and other considerations from the line of questioning and ensure that things and decisions and actions are being taken on fact alone. I know in a lot of cases, employers will even remove name so that there is nothing there that could be taken into consideration outside of the raw facts. So I think that's important. And then it's important to continue to monitor it because, again, as AI becomes smarter over time, it's becoming smarter based on actions you take. So if there is bias built into us, which we know that there is, right? We know that we look for things that are similar, just unconsciously, right? And that we look for ways we can confirm things we think we already know. So we have to monitor ourselves and monitor what's happening in that process to ensure that it's not being harmful. But I think implementing AI can actually expose some of that for organizations and allow them to take action, which is a really cool and important thing. And I mean, right now we're seeing a lot of organizations think about, how do I include more? How do I grow the diversity of my workforce? So that would be my tip.
Yep. Blythe, how about you?
Well, and I think what I'm realizing is socioeconomically, we know that there's more Black and brown people who are on at a poverty level. It's just a statistic. And so by being able to reach more people who don't have a computer and the internet, you are diversifying your talent pool. So just by using this channel, and on one hand, you're being able to reach more people. But to Gretchen's point, I think it is funny. So those of us who are configuring chatbots or the coders who are writing these algorithms, we have bias and we're building it in to be able to do scale. The thing that is different about this is the ability to see clearer metrics, because now you've got more of the process automated. You actually can, like if a recruiting coordinator was calling a bunch of people and then just passing through, these are the folks that I think should be screened, you wouldn't have as much visibility around what's actually happening. So one of the opportunities around using this and being able to identify places of bias or impact that aren't desired is to be able to see underneath what's happening from a data perspective and start to ask why. So I think that is something that encourages me as an opportunity for us to figure out where that bias maybe has been in interpersonal. part of the process that we then automated, and then start to figure out how do we undo it and adjust things to make it more equitable for everybody.
Yeah, so one thing that you and I like to talk about, Blythe, that I think is important. So we're talking from the organization side. I think all three of us are used to working primarily with recruiters or staffing organizations or inside big companies. So what would we say for the candidate himself or herself? I think we have to kind of think about it. So if I'm a candidate, what tips or tactics, or how would you, I mean, I would just simply say, don't fear, right? Which is, well, it's easier said than done, I think, for a lot of people. But what would you say? Let me start this time with you, Blythe, and then we'll go to Gretchen, to the candidate himself or herself.
In terms of like experiencing AI?
Yeah, right. Like if you're getting started with a job search, right? Like we can take the ICU example. That's a great example, but because one of the things that has happened here is we've removed geography as a consideration. Right? So you suddenly could be, I mean, in ICU, you probably have to be in the ICU, but like for a lot of different jobs, you literally could pick up and go somewhere else with the right chatbot, or you can work out of your house. So I think you have to get a little bit, like if we're flipping it, if I'm searching for work, there is a silver lining here on the candidate side too, right?
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting, and this is maybe just, it's a little bit less about AI and more about just the place we're in right now with COVID and the technology adoption that Gretchen was talking about at the very beginning of this, is that we need to open our minds to what's possible, and it could look different than it did in the past. And so I know as I'm talking I do some career coaching with Tracy, we help some certain folks with career coaching. And one of the things we find with those conversations is folks have a very, it's funny, a 3-month-old thinking about what a career could look like is dated. And the reality is there's more virtual opportunities that were available before. The standard around technology knowledge and comfort is higher than it was before. And so there's maybe even to the point of our adoption happening faster. Technology related jobs are now in higher demand. So there's just some things that I think folks are still processing around what's happened and how does it translate to an opportunity now. To your point, Tracy, about even location, right? Or the ability to maybe you can do more gig work or something more virtual. It's more possible than it was before. But I think the other thing is also just that there are also a lot of fundamentals that haven't changed, which is, managers want to know, and hiring managers want to know that you've researched the organization and that you understand what their values are and you understand the job and you
still have to have the skills.
Right. So all that stuff is the same, but there is a little bit of, opening up and saying, what else is possible now that wasn't before, that I would suggest to job seekers. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the news, but there also are silver linings, and to step back and look for where those opportunities are.
That's
Gretchen?
great.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I think similarly, open up your mind. And if you are dead set on a perm opportunity, on a direct hire, long-term opportunity, open your mind up to contract or gig work. Employers are more likely to be adding back contract positions before they are more direct hire permanent positions. It's a great way to get your foot in the door with an organization. And a lot of times that work can end up being more lucrative and offers more flexibility, than a perm position. So we're starting to see the needle turn there, but I know for a lot of job seekers who have never done contract work before, it's still something that seems totally foreign. So I think do some research, talk to people who have done that kind of work or firms who employ those kind of workers and see what that's all about. And I think to your point, Blythe, there are a lot of opportunities you'll be surprised to learn about when you do that.
Yeah. Great advice.
Yeah, well, I think we are going to call it a wrap. What we'd love to is hear from all of you. I think we're committed, Gretchen and I, to continuing this series, Keep Calm and AI On. We know that there's never a shortage of topics, and we're here to debunk those myths and give you hope, stop the doom and gloom, because there's a lot to be very positive about. Thank you, Blythe, for being here. Gretchen, I think you had something, another sneak peek coming attraction you wanted to tell people about, right? That's if they want more on this topic and some other things. So let me ask you about that before I call it a day here.
Yeah, great. So this week, just in a couple days before our holiday weekend here, there's another webinar on Thursday. And whether or not you're in the staffing industry, it doesn't matter. This is for all recruitment professionals, but Staffing Industry Analysts is hosting a webinar Thursday afternoon. I believe it's noon Eastern time. And it will be a roundtable, really, but representation from a number of different technology organizations in the AI and automation space. I know Maya will be a part of that, Sense will be a part of that, and I think it's just another opportunity to hear more practical examples of where this can be applied. So I encourage everybody to check that out as well. And to Tracy's point, we hope to see you again soon here too. And Blythe, thank you very much for joining us today. It's great.
Thanks, everybody. Well, have a, hopefully you can join that webinar and have a safe holiday weekend, whatever happens. We're 4th of July coming up here. Hard to believe it's 4th of July, right? But it is. No fireworks, I would imagine, but enjoy. And we'll be back with our next Keep Calm and AI On.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.